Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Licensing Subcommittee meeting. My name's John Grieve. I work in Governance Services and I'll be clerking today's meeting. Under agenda item number 1, Councillor Ben Garner was nominated as the chair prior to the start of the meeting. Are all members agreeable to Councillor Garner's appointment?
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Garner is formally elected to the chair. Can I now hand over the meeting to you, Councillor Garner?
Thanks, John, and morning, everyone, and welcome to this remote hearing in the Licensing Subcommittee. As John said, my name is Councillor Ben Garner, and I'll be chairing today. Before we proceed further, can I just remind everyone we are being streamed live on the Leeds City Council YouTube channel, and just 2 other members of the subcommittee, if Neil and Abigail, you can introduce yourselves, please.
Yes, Councillor Neil Buckley, I represent Old Woodley Ward.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Councillor Abigail Marshall-Cutting, representing Little London Woodhouse and the City Centre.
Thank you. And I'd also like to confirm that this meeting of the Licensing Subcommittee, although we're in remote attendance, meets the requirements of the Council's constitution. And while items today will be fully discussed as usual, remote attendance, as most people will be aware with all these Zoom calls and things, requires a few slight changes to how we'll manage the debate. So as John said earlier, if we can mute microphones unless invited to speak, and this will stop any background noise. If you can keep cameras on during the hearing where possible, that's fantastic. As I say, we are streaming as well, but I think we're on a speaker view, so people won't be able to see you on YouTube unless you're speaking, but it'll be useful. It's useful for all the members on the Zoom call just to see everyone, and everyone will be invited to introduce themselves at the start of the hearing in a couple of minutes time to make it clear to public observers who will be involved. So just if we can ask for patience while we go through this, remote hearings are still a little bit new and there's a lot of people today as well, so things might not go massively according to plan, but hopefully will. Could I now invite officers to introduce yourselves and then mute yourselves once you've introduced yourselves? I'll start with Rob Brown in Legal Services.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Robert Brown. I'm a solicitor in Leeds City Council's Legal Services, and I'm the legal advisor to the subcommittee this morning.
And Philippa, are you still on the call? Philippa, are you okay to introduce? I'll just go through legal and then entertainment and then.
Yes, sorry, it's Philippa Murray from Legal Services, and I'm here supporting Rob Brown if need be.
Thank you. And entertainment licensing?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Matthew. I'm part of Entertainment Licensing, and today I'm supported by Samantha Longfellow-Pennicott and Nawazish Khan. Thank you.
And we've got Sue Duckworth as well from. Oops, sorry, Sue, you're on the phone.
Yes, good morning, Chair. I'm Sue Duckworth from Entertainment Licensing, but I'm representing the Licensing Authority this morning.
Thank you. And we've got Governance Services.
Good morning, this is John Grieve and I'll be clerking today's meeting.
Morning, Andy Booth, and I'm here to support John Grieve.
Thank you. And I think that's all the officers. Anyone else is sort of council staff are here as objectors. So could I ask the applicant and applicant's representative to introduce yourselves, please?
Good morning, my name is Nick Semper and I am a licensing consultant representing the applicant this morning.
Thank you. And the applicant themselves, if you're able to introduce yourself.
That's Sarwat down in the bottom right-hand corner.
Ah, right.
He's got himself on mute, I'm afraid.
Morning. I'm I'm Sawad Abdullah, owner for the supermarket.
Good, thank you. That's great. And could I ask the objectors to introduce yourselves? We'll start with West Yorkshire Police. Anyone from either the licensing or local neighbourhood policing team, please?
Morning, yeah, PC Andy Clifford from West Yorkshire Police Licensing.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Fred Winster. I'm a neighbourhood policing sergeant with West Yorkshire Police, and I'm the lead sergeant for Gipton and Hare Hills Ward.
Thank you. And I should have got to introduce herself at this point. So apologies for that. Sue Duckworth already introduced herself, but she's here as a licensing authority objector. So thank you. Could I just go on to just seeing who we've got on call? We've got Peter Mudge.
Hi, yes, I'm Pete Mudge. I work in the communities team and for neighbourhood centres, trying to rejuvenate them, reduce ASB and generally help improve the area for the businesses and communities.
Thank you. And have we got Chetna Patel?
Hi, good morning everyone. My name's Chetna. I work for Public Health in Leeds City Council, focusing on the Inner East locality.
Okay, thank you. I think the final people, last but not least, the elected members for the ward.
Yes, hi everybody. My name is Councillor Salma Arif and I'm the councillor for Gipton and Hare Hills.
I've got Councillor Hussain as well. You might be on mute, Councillor Hussain, if you're there, if you want to introduce yourself, please. If not, I'm sure you'll port in a bit later on. We'll leave you be for now, just in the interest of time. But I can see you're on the call.
Sorry, Chair. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. Councillor Arif Hussain from Gipton and Hare Hills.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think that's everyone. Brilliant. So I think that's everyone. John, are you able to just swing through agenda items 2 to 5, please?
Thank you, Chair. Under agenda item 2, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Under item number 3, there are no exempt information on the agenda. Under agenda item number 4, we have no late items, but I am aware some supplementary information has been circulated to all parties. So firstly, we've got a series of photographs from the applicant showing both the inside and outside of the premises. Secondly, we've got some photographs from the ward councillor highlighting street drinking problems in the area. And Entertainment Licensing have submitted 2 appendices to their officers' report. Appendix J, which is an extract from the Cumulative Impact Assessment 2018. And Appendix K is a list of the surrounding premises. Now, that's been circulated to all parties, and I understand it's also on the council's website. Under agenda item 5, could I ask members if they have any disclosable pecuniary interests?
No.
No.
Right, that's no interest. Thank you. Chair, that's back to you.
Thank you. So we're on to the main part of the agenda, agenda item number 6, the application for the grant of a premises license for Zuba Mini Market, 29 to 31 Seaforth Place, Hare Hills. Could the legal advisor to the subcommittee outline the procedure for the hearing, please?
Thank you, Chair. Our usual procedure for this type of application is that the applicant addresses the committee first, and then any other parties who've indicated an intention to speak at the hearing would then address the committee, and then the applicant has the chance to respond to anything said by the other parties. Members have discussed the order in which the objectors, if I put it that way, speak, and have suggested that the following order: West Yorkshire Police to go first, then Cleaner Neighbourhoods, then the licensing authority, and then communities and environment, the local ward member, and then members of the public, if there are any who submitted objections. In making its determination, the subcommittee will consider what's appropriate and proportionate to promote the licensing objectives. In particular, 1, the prevention of crime and disorder, 2, public safety, 3, the prevention of public nuisance, and 4, the protection of children from harm. The regulations permit the subcommittee to set a time limit on presentations, provided that the same time limit is applied to all parties. The usual time limit applied is 15 minutes per party, and the applicant may wish to split their allocation between their initial presentation and their response to the other parties. For example, 10 minutes initially, followed by 5 minutes at the end. Can I ask the applicant's representative and in turn the other parties whether they would like to ask the committee for longer than a total of 15 minutes for their submissions, bearing in mind that the same time limit would apply to all? It will be for members to decide how long is allowed, but if you, Mr. Semper, would like to.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Brown. Yeah, there's an awful lot of people to speak against this application, and therefore I'm at something of a disadvantage if we all get 15 minutes each. So would it be possible if I speak for 20 minutes, please?
Well, it would have to be the same time limit applying to each party, because they have that right once they put a representation in. It might be that some parties don't wish to speak for that long, but it would be the same time limit. You think you can complete your presentation, including response time, within 20 minutes?
I'm very much hoping so, sir.
Okay. Right. Well, can I then go to PC Clifford? Do you think 20 minutes would suffice for you?
Yeah, that's more than enough for myself. Just to point out, though, that Sergeant Winster will need some separate time, but yeah, mine's under 20 minutes.
Yes, Sergeant Winster's put in his own representation, I understand it.
Yeah.
In fact, is it easier if anybody who doesn't think that 20 minutes would suffice speaks now? So can I take it that 20 minutes would suffice for everybody? Okay, thank you. Can I ask you, Chair, do you wish to set a time limit? And if so, what time limit would you want to set?
I think it seems if everyone was going to speak for a full 20 minutes, I'd probably want to set a bit more of a time limit, but it looks as though people aren't going to speak for the full 20, apart from the applicants with their summing up after questions and things as well. So personally, I'm quite happy unless my fellow members are unhappy at giving 20 minutes, but up to if we can.
I think my comment, Councillor Garner, would be that it should be an absolute maximum of that.
Excellent. I can see a nod from Councillor Marshall. So yeah, I think we're good with an absolute maximum of 20 minutes per respondent.
Party. Mr. Semper, do you wish to split your time or to let people know now how you would split your time? Or I mean, it's up to you how you manage it. Obviously, you've got the 20 minutes. You could have 15 minutes followed by 5 or 18 minutes followed by 2. But do you want to let the clerk know now, or do you want to just see how you go?
Well, I think we'll have to see how we go, and I'll tell you for why. If people ask me a lot of questions, that's going to eat into my
well, it's not actually. That the questions, time for questions and answers is in addition to your time for your presentation.
In that case, I don't know, 18 minutes and 2. Would that be okay, sir?
It's entirely up to you how you split it. And if you don't want to say now, then perhaps you can leave it there. As long as you've got a stopwatch on yourself, so you know how much time you've got left.
Yeah. Okay.
So time limit of 20 minutes will apply to all parties for their submissions. After each presentation, the subcommittee members may wish to ask questions, and as I said, the time for questions to be asked and answered is in addition to the time limit set for presentations. Please note that we do not permit cross-examination in subcommittee. If any party feels there is a crucial question that needs to be asked and answered, please don't ask the person directly, but instead make a request to the chair, who will then determine whether or not the question should be put. Parties may request permission to call witnesses Can I ask if any party wishes to call a witness today? Perhaps if I start with you, Mr. Semper.
No, sir, I'm good as long as Mr. Sawat's here. Mr. Abdullah's here, Sawat Abdullah's here, then that's absolutely great.
Thank you. PC Clifford?
No witnesses from me.
Mr. Mudge?
Yes, Chetna Patel will be my witness. She's already introduced herself from Public Health England.
Thank you. Mrs. Duckworth?
No.
Thank you. Sergeant Winster?
No witnesses from me, no.
And do we have any other parties I've missed? I lost a councillor.
Yes.
Sorry, Councillor
No,
Arif.
no,
Okay.
and no witnesses on my behalf.
Thank you. Sorry, I was looking at all these different boxes, getting confused. Yeah, if all documents should have been submitted, and I know that Mr. Grieve has already explained that there are 3 supplementary packs of documents, but everybody should be working from the same original pack containing, I think it's 70 or pages numbered to 71. It would be helpful if you do refer to documents to identify which document you're referring to by its bundle page number. Can I ask if there are any additional documents that anybody wishes to table now? No? Okay, good. Please note that your presentation is your only opportunity to address the subcommittee. So you need to make sure you've included in your presentation everything that you wish to say and to have taken into account. After the parties have made their presentations and after any questions, the members will consider whether they have all the information they require to make a decision. Once this point is reached, members of the committee will go into a private session. And if members have any additional questions to ask, they'll return to the meeting to ask those questions. They'll then return to the private session to make their decision. Can all parties please remain in the meeting until they're actually asked to leave? All parties will be informed once the hearing has ended and will be advised of the decision in writing within 5 working days of today. Can I ask if there are any questions or representations about the procedure we propose to follow before we commence the hearing? No? Okay, thank you. Chair.
Thank you, Rob. And I just realised there's someone who we might not have asked to introduce yourself just because you weren't on my written list, but I've noticed you're in the box there. Is it Mr. Khan? Are you able to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, I think Matthew mentioned my name. It's Nawazish Khan, Entertainment Licensing. I'm the licensing officer.
Thank you. That's fine, just because you weren't on my list and then I saw you. So, thank you very much. Could we go on to Matthew then, as licensing officer? Are you able to present the application, please?
Yeah, of course, Chair. Thank you. So today members are asked to consider an application for the grant of a premise licence made by Mr. Sawat Hamad Abdullah for Zuba Mini Market, 29 to 31 Seaforth Place, Hare Hills, Leeds, LS9. The application explains that the premises will operate as a small local retail shop. So as mentioned previously, the applicant is Mr. Sawat Hamad Abdullah, and the proposed designated premise supervisor is a Mr. Halo Hamid. In summary, the application is for the sale by retail of alcohol for consumption off the premises to take place between Monday to Sunday from 7 AM until 10:30 PM, and there's no non-standard timings that have been proposed. So attached to Appendix A on page 13 of the report is a copy of the premise license application, which includes at Section M the steps the applicant is willing to take to promote the licensing objectives, also provided by the applicant under Part 3 of the application form that begins on page 15 of the report is supporting information. So the application has attracted representations to this application from responsible authorities that oppose the application outright. These have been received from the Licensing Authority, Cleaning Neighbourhoods, Communities and Environment and West Yorkshire Police. The primary grounds for objection from many of these responsible authorities are the premises location within the area's cumulative impacts area and the severity of the problems that's being experienced in that area. So I'll quickly go through the locations of these representations that are within the report. At Appendix C on page 47, you have the representation submitted by the licensing authority. The representation from Cleaning Neighbourhoods team can be found at Appendix D on page 51. The representation from Communities and Environments team is attached to Appendix E on page 55 of the report. The representation from West Yorkshire Police Licensing Department can be found at Appendix F on page 59 of the report. And finally, the representation from the Sergeant of the local neighbourhood policing team is at Appendix G on page 63 of the report. Additionally, the application has attracted representations from 2 local ward councillors and the local resident. The representations from the councillors object on the grounds of alcohol-related issues, and a copy of these representations are at Appendix H on page 67 of the report. It should also be noted that Councillor Salma Arif has been approached by local constituents asking for the councillor to represent their views at the hearing. Finally, the application has attracted a representation from a local resident expressing concerns in relation to an increase in crime and antisocial behaviour in the area. And a redacted copy of that representation can be found at Appendix I on page 71 of the report. So as mentioned, there's a later item is Appendix J, which is an outline of the cumulative impact policy specific to aerials, and Appendix K is a list of the surrounding licensed premises and their licensing hours. And that, Chair, is the application. Thank you.
Thank you. So could I invite Mr. Semper and Mr. Abdullah to present your case, please? And remember, you've got up to 20 minutes, although we'll want to keep some of that time for not answering questions, but sort of any additional summing up you want to do after objectors have spoken and after questions.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Right, now, time is of the essence, and therefore I won't be going through the application itself, okay, because you've all got it in front of you. Now, I'm grateful for the sight of the representations. They explain there's a problem with award and consequently a cumulative impact policy has been imposed. For the reasons of time and clarity, I will deal with them largely together. Essentially, this application is dismissed out of hand by these representations. It appears to defy the restrictions of the cumulative impact policy. I understand their position, respect it, but I will explain why I beg to differ. To put it out there first, I've read the application, especially the section regarding the operating schedule, which contains the lengthiest explanation that I've ever encountered in a Section 17 application. I'm not the author of it and have picked up this case as an agent. I've read the police report that criticises some of the content of it, and I personally and professionally take those points. Nobody here is arguing whether Leeds needs its CIAs or the nature and quality of the statistical data by which this decision was arrived at. However, this hearing is all about the conditions offered and whether they reduce the likelihood that a successful grant would be likely to impact on the licensing objectives. Now, the effect of a cumulative impact policy is to create a rebuttable presumption, i.e. it can be rebutted, and indeed that is what I'm here to do. That applications for licenses which would be likely to add to the existing cumulative impact will normally be refused or be subject to certain limitations unless the applicant can demonstrate that there will be no negative cumulative impact on the licensing objectives. Now, this is explained to you in the Local Government Association Councillors Handbook on the Licensing Act 2003 at page 17, para 2. A cumulative impact policy, therefore, does not lead to an automatic blanket ban on the grant of new licenses. Now, it is impossible to show that there will be no impact because nobody's got a crystal ball as to what will happen in the future. So we're in the terrain here of either an outright refusal or this application being subject to certain limitations, i.e. robust, appropriate and proportionate conditions. And indeed, there are 31 of the conditions offered as part of this application. The statutory guidance, which empowered you to create the CIP, also explains at para 14.44 that, and I quote, a CIA should always allow for applications that are unlikely to add to cumulative impact on the licensing objectives to be granted. Therefore, we, i.e. myself and Sarwat, need to show that were you to grant this modest premises licence on this tiny shop, it would be unlikely to add to the cumulative effect on the licensing objectives. The legislation uses the word unlikely, which simply means not likely to happen. So you'll be aware that the CIP does not mean a blanket ban on new applications. I'm a big fan of CIPs, by the way. I've been involved in a few myself in an earlier life. They provide a powerful filter for substandard applications, and this is not a substandard application, incidentally. However, they can also have downsides too, and I'll give a few. Firstly, stagnation. If used bluntly, they can preserve a very poor status quo with poor operators selling to children and drugs in a neighbourhood. And secondly, they deter, or in a case of a blanket ban, shut out new responsible operators. The Licensing Act is very clearly at odds with its Iron Curtain approach, as referred to in the Brewdog case in Your Fine City. Indeed, each application should be taken on its own merits. Okay, so the national picture, the Journal of Licensing says, which your licensing teams will be very familiar with, as of March 2018, across the UK, 107 local authorities applied 223 cumulative impact policies. Within those 223 saturation areas in the year ending March 2017, a whopping 1,124 applications for new premises licenses were made. Of those, a staggering 94% were granted. This means that 6% nationally of applications within CIPs have been refused. Think about that for a moment. The dissonance and variance between the national picture and the local interpretation here in Hare Hills cannot be lost upon you, I am sure. Now, how can all these other authorities be getting it so wrong by granting 94% of licensing applications within their CIA areas? I strongly argue that these other authorities value and indeed apply their CIPs correctly, and consequently grant new premises licenses which are conditioned creatively and robustly so as not to add to any pre-existing cumulative impact within their own environs. As stated, the statutory guidance explains at 14.44 where it clearly states a CIA should allow for applications that are unlikely to add to cumulative impact on the licensing objectives to be granted. So, can I convince you that that this application will impact on the licensing objectives, and how likely would that be? The police tell us there are already many off licenses operating in the cumulative impact area already. Would one more be likely to seriously undermine the licensing objectives? You may not be completely convinced by that argument, frankly, and then would that one more operating under restricted hours are committed to a set of model, exemplary, national best practice license conditions, all 31 of them, like the ones you see before you, would that new premises be really likely to add to cumulative impact? Really? Okay, and lastly, would that one more, stocking such a small quantity of alcohol, be likely to add to the cumulative impact? Photo 1 in your bundle shows you that this is truly a tiny shop. Photo 2 shows you the minimum depth of that shop, gives you the perspective. Now, my front room is bigger than that shop. Photo 3 shows effectively the 2 bookcases behind the front counter that will be used to stock all alcohol, all the alcohol products in that shop that they will ever hold. We are talking about very small quantities here. We also need to recognise that people need to take some personal responsibility for their own ASB. Alcohol is not a controlled drug. The operator doesn't commit the ASB. That's why we have PSPO's, Public Spaces Protection Orders. The CIP is not the primary enforcement mechanism for a galloping localised litter, noise and ASB issue problem in the area. It is just one small part of a toolkit. Now, I'm now going to respectfully remind you the powers through highlighting the relevant parts of the statutory guidance, and your lawyer will be making great notes of these, I'm sure, if they do not know them already, and I'm sure they do. It's all found in chapter 14 of the statutory guidance. Para 14.40 states, it is therefore open to you, the panel, Mr. Gardner, to grant this application where to consider it appropriate and where the applicant can demonstrate in the operating schedule that it would not be likely to add to cumulative impact. Para 14.44, it says that CIA should never be absolute. Okay, so you can grant this license if you were satisfied that the conditions offered obviate the actual, not the notional or blanket risk, but actually support the promotion of the licensing objectives at these premises. And indeed, the House of Commons briefing paper 07269 of the 16th of April 2019 confirms that it does not, it does indeed say on page 7 that applications that are unlikely to add to the cumulative impact on the licensing objectives should be granted. That's unlikely, not definitely will not. Okay, so let me address you. Here we are. How many minutes am I into? I'll look at the thing in a minute. Let me address you on likelihood, please. Let's break it down. How likely a real and tangible rise in cumulative impact would be, issue by issue, line by line. 1, street drinking is a problem. Fine. Therefore, we will not sell high percent ABV drinks that are favoured by street drinkers. Your box standard street drinker needs about 20 units of alcohol for breakfast to function properly. We simply won't stock the preferred products with which they self-medicate. 2, we also will not serve in single units, which is how street drinkers purchase their alcohol. They purchase one at a time due to lack of money, and in case they're intercepted by your excellent community protection teams or police, and consequently have their stock of multiple cans confiscated. 3, our alcohol might find its way into the street drinking population. Fine, we'll mark our stock if and when such a scheme is introduced. Now, I commend to you the excellent results your colleagues are having over in Wakefield with the use of smart water and invisible, indelible, unique DNA marking of our products. We'd like to do that, please. We will go with that. So confident are we that our stock will be retailed responsibly from our premises. In the meantime, we will use really sticky little price labels with a shop's name on it, so you can identify who is selling what to whom. CCTV. There are many CCTV cameras fitted in this premises, 6 in all, including overhead coverage of all points of sale to reassure the authorities and your good selves that we won't and don't sell alcohol to drunks and children. We offer to work proactively with any watch scheme and will work with any community health or safety partnership that assists these poor, unfortunate people, if needs be, by refusing to sell them alcohol through any banning scheme you set up. We'll undertake to attain responsible retailer award accreditation and responsible alcohol retailing qualifications should you require it. And should there be future litter problems, we will fit a bin outside our premises. Okay, very briefly on street drinking, the Antisocial Behaviour, Crime and Policing Act of 2014, the officers will tell you it is actually no offence to drink in a PSPO area. It's only an offence. It's only an offence to refuse a request to cease drinking or surrender alcohol to an authorised person. A street drinker, unfortunate though it is, those habits are, is actually doing nothing unlawful. Okay, right. Let's quickly flip through because I'm running out of time. Okay, the representations claim that were you to grant this application, then the situation will become worse. I gainsay that. I maintain that only selling small volumes of low-strength alcohol that street drinkers do not favour in a controlled manner will not cause a new localised spike in alcoholism or conjure up many more so far unidentified street drinkers who will suddenly flood into the area. They have no evidence of that. It is merely their opinion, though very valued though it is, based on speculation. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about right, yeah, here we go. I'm sure the panel are already aware of Article 1 of the first protocol of the European Convention on Human Rights. I only mention it because it's in your own policy. The applicant's got a perfect right to apply for this licence and to be treated fairly throughout the process in accordance with the primary legislation first, the Licensing Act, the statutory guidance, which I've quoted repeatedly throughout my presentation, and lastly, your own statement of licensing policy in that hierarchy. And lastly, I must remind you that if you have not heard in this meeting, and hopefully you will not hear today because I've gone through the representations, one piece of evidence that speaks against this particular applicant or his premises. The applicant is acutely aware that if he is successful today, you have placed a very great trust in him and that his tiny shop will cause you zero concern going forward. He is a court interpreter for Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service and also the Home Office, and has been a businessman for many years. He actually holds a master's in transport and civil engineering. This is not an irresponsible operator. Winding up, the legislation requires you to base your decision on the likelihood that this tiny shop selling low values of low alcohol beers, never in single cans, will add to the cumulative impact already experienced in the area. Now, people can already have Tesco's deliver any quantity of alcohol of any strength to their doors, at their leisure when all is said and done. This shop has been open for 6 months already, has created a zero footprint of issues or incidents to the responsible authorities, and we have 2 pages of signatures from customers to support the applicants in their wish to obtain a premises licence. Consequently, I respectfully exhort you to grant this application. We will, of course, accept any further conditions, Chair, that you feel are proportionate and appropriate for this tiny shop. Thank you. How did I do on time?
I'll leave someone else to do the times, but thank you, Mr. Semper. I'll open it up to questions from the subcommittee. Councillor Buckley or Councillor Marshall, have you any questions first of all?
Yes, Chair. Just an observation, if I can, and then a question. Mr. Semper made a very forceful presentation, and there was no doubt as to the case he was putting. The comment I would just make initially is that part of his remarks concerned phrases such as only one more premise would not make any difference to the problem, the already existing problem. And in a way, that's an indefinable comment, because if there were 100 premises or 150, any applicant could say, well, 101 or 151 cannot possibly make it different. That's a comment. And my question was that he gave us some assurances about the kind of alcohol that his client was intending to sell, and also that they would not be selling to street drinkers the kind of drinks that they want. However, we have heard some written submissions concerning things like yard parties and that kind of thing. Now, that wouldn't be street drinkers in the definition of street drinkers. It would be a different thing. So I'd like him to tell me what assurances he can give about that aspect of the sales, please.
Right, they're all good points. Okay. Yard parties, let's do yard parties. Yes, it is possible that people having a yard party could buy low strength alcohol at this shop, should it be issued. Okay, it's unlikely because you have many retailers in the area, some of them quite large, that sell all forms of alcohol cheaper. And I don't want to name individual places, but they're on your list. Okay, but we also need to recognise that people need to take personal responsibility for their own ASB. I've told you that ASB is not a controlled drug. Okay, and the statutory guidance is very clear that yard parties and what have you that occur away from the orbit and the ambit of the premises are not actually the fault of the retailer. Now that's very clearly made out in the statutory guidance, sir. If I can help you any further.
That's fine, Chair, for now.
That's all right, thank you. Councillor Marshall, have you any questions for Mr. Semper?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Semper, for your detailed presentation. I'm just going to follow on the comment you have just made, which says people need to take responsibility for their own action. We have a moral duty, and for me, when it comes to the level of an additional store in the application you're making, obviously also following from what Councillor Buckley has said, in which you mentioned an additional one. So if we have a crisis and if we have a problem, there is already a problem. So when we have an additional one, that is an additional problem. So when you say that people need to take responsibility, I would like you to explain further on why you think people need to take responsibility, and as an authority and as a local councillor, what we should be doing to help people take responsibility. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Well, again, excellent points. Now, this one more additional store, I've cautioned you, with respect, I've cautioned you against this because the CIP doesn't bring in a blanket ban. Okay, each one's got to be considered on its own merit. You've also challenged me on people taking their own responsibility and what I've said. Okay, I've just looked it up because it's not me that's saying it. It's para 2.21. Your lawyers make an immediate note of this because this is the law. This is handed down to us by government. Okay, and para 2.21 of the statutory guidance, word for word, says, beyond the immediate area surrounding the premises, these are matters for the personal responsibility of individuals under the law. An individual who engages in antisocial behaviour is accountable in their own right. Okay, so that's what the law says. But yes, I hear you. I hear what you're saying. And this is why we have offered very robust conditions, ma'am. And this is why we will not sell the high strength alcohol products favoured by those intent upon misusing misusing alcohol. And secondly, we will not sell it in volume, as I showed you the photograph of the two bookcases behind the which will hold all the alcohol that this tiny shop will ever sell. Okay, and lastly, we won't sell it in the way that people who have an alcohol problem in the area buy it. Now, those are our social responsibilities. I've offered you responsible alcohol retailing training. I've offered you responsible retailer accreditation. That's to do with proxy sales for children and, you know, the refusals for people who are inebriated or underage, challenge 25. You're really looking there at those 31 conditions as exemplar conditions, ma'am. I'm struggling to think of what more we could offer. But if you come up with something, anything, councillor, please tell us what it is. And you know what? We'll probably accept it. Thank you.
Councillor Marshall, have you got any follow-up there? Or?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Semper. I just needed to establish that I know you quoted the law on people taking responsibility. I also wanted to also ascertain from yourself that you also have a social responsibility, and you have given that to me. So thank you.
Thank you. So certainly one question from me. I might have a second one as well. Ms. Semper, you mentioned the tiny shop quite a few times there, and I suppose and we've got the photo of the two bookshelves, but two shelves, I suppose, you call them bookshelves. But two shelves like that in a tiny shop are quite a significant part. I know the application has said about 20% floor space. Would you agree that a couple of bookshelves like that in a tiny shop, as you keep saying, make it a you know, if we had two massive shelves like that in a tiny shop of newspapers, it'd be a paper shop. If there were two shelves like that of sweets, it'd be a sweet shop. Would you agree that two shelves in a tiny shop would then be a bottle shop?
All right, that I did, like I say, I don't want to give the impression I'm distancing myself from the original application, because it has merits in itself, the 31 conditions. If it says 20%, I'll tell you, those two bookshops, if that makes up 10% of that shop, that's all it is. So you're absolutely right, councillor. If you can amend that 20% to 10%, if it will give you the, and I'll just ask Councillor Marshall for suggestions, if that will give you the reassurance that you would like, we'll come down from 20% to 10.
Thank you. And just saying, do you want to comment on? And I will be asking the objectors about this as well, but just while we can ask you questions about this peak alcohol related crime that's in this cumulative impact assessment, and the link to the opening hours, or the proposed opening hours. So we've got the peak alcohol related crime for the area between 3 p.m. and 11 p.m, which matches quite closely to, especially to your closing time. Do you want to comment on that?
I just realised what I did. I muted myself. What an idiot. Okay. Yes, I do want to comment on that. Firstly, the hours that we've offered, we've got a lower closing time than anybody else on that list, I believe. So we're not asking, you've got 24-hour shops there, you've got shops selling till all hours. This is a very modest application, sir.
That's great, thank you. There are questions. I had Councillor Buckley, Councillor Marshall, any others for Mr. Semper for the applicant?
Not from me at the
No
moment.
further questions, Chair. Thank you.
That's great, thank you. Could I invite the objectors to present their case? So we'll propose a bit of an order, starting with the two police, the licensing section and the neighbourhood policing team first, and if that's okay for the two of you, maybe with the licensing section first. Is that PT Clifford? And we've got up to 20 minutes. I'm stressing the up to there, but feel free to use it. But I think people have already indicated that they won't be.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I picked up on this talk of one more tiny off-license and two bookshelves of alcohol, but the fact remains that there are a lot of off-licenses within the CIA area, and one more will inevitably impact on that, whether it's two bookshelves full of beer or whatever. I just want to discuss, because Mr. Semper talks about traditional street drinkers, which is an issue. But I found that when I walk around Hare Hills, that you get a culture of social drinking, and it's not the alcohol dependent people. Those do exist and those do cause issues, don't get me wrong, but then in the mix you've got groups of men standing outside bins directly outside off licenses, drinking and smoking as if it was a bar or something, just standing in the street, and having to walk through that. These aren't your traditional street drinkers, but it is adding to they are still drunk, they are still loud and boisterous, and drinking other kinds of alcohol, not just the high percentage cheap alcohol. So that is a factor. That's something I've experienced personally walking around Hare Hills. So it's a little bit of a multi-layered issue, really. He's mentioned about avoiding proxy sales a couple of times, and it's been mentioned in the application, but there's nothing that I've seen that negates or shows how they can negate proxy sales. There's nothing sort of concrete that they mentioned in relation to that. So just let me get a few more points here. So, to my knowledge, this cumulative impact assessment is fairly recent, and this is probably the first application that I can think of. It's not really enough time for the CIA to have much impact, a meaningful impact on the area. What we don't need is another off-license that's going to be further driving down the already cheap prices of alcohol in the area. As we've said, street drinking is a blight on the community of Hare Hills, and it's the ongoing focus of multiple agencies and local authorities trying to tackle it. It seems quite apparent that the applicant and the agent and the person submitting the application don't understand the local area, as they wouldn't be seeking to apply for this at all. That's evidenced by the fact that the state of Hare Hills was not covered by a PSPO, which would indicate alcohol-related problems, and we know that it is covered by a PSPO and the CIA. So they must concede that there's real issues within this community, and I don't feel like this application does anything to alleviate those issues. It will add to. The applicant states that a retail outlet is not considered to have an adverse effect on residents and businesses unless the owner or staff are committing offences, and they're willing to agree not to commit offences, and this is in the application, and I should hope that they're not going to be committing any offences, and I should hope that they'd be willing to say that. But of course, a retail outlet can have an adverse effect on those living in the area and on local businesses. We know this because it's currently happening in Hare Hills. Local businesses are blighted by the street drinking issue, and local residents have obviously made objections. The application attempts to play down how many off licenses are within the impact area, and I can walk through this area and drop on an off license every few minutes, even less in some parts. They're next door to each other. So using cherry-picked figures is quite a transparent tactic to divert attention away from the issues that Hare Hills is facing. Myself, neighbourhood policing colleagues, councillors and local residents who frequently attend the streets of this area have seen the real physical impact street drinking and the congregation of casual drinking and the concentration of licences has on people every day and businesses every day. So, like I said, I don't really feel like we mentioned one tiny off license, but it's just one more tiny off license, one more place for somebody to go buy alcohol, stand outside in the street drinking, another place to compete with the numerous other off licenses and further drive down those prices. For all the reasons that I've said, West Yorkshire Police would urge you to not authorise this licence. And just to quote again from the statement of licensing policy, it'd be inconsistent with the council's duty to promote the licensing objectives to grant new and variation applications for any premises licence which seek off sales and late night refreshment to operate during peak hours as described in the cumulative impact area for assessment for Hare Hills. And that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, PC Clifford. Any questions from my fellow members for PC Clifford?
Please, Chair.
Yep.
Yeah, just one question in two parts, if you like, Chair, of PC Clifford. He mentioned walking around the area, either on his own or with councillors or whoever else. And I just wanted him to confirm what he said, really, that this phrase, just one more premise, would nevertheless, in his opinion, cause further problems. And then he mentioned the prevalence of the numbers of off-licence premises. Would PC Clifford like to tell us give us some examples of the malign effects and what kind of antisocial behaviour that he's actually seen in the area, please?
Yeah, Councillor. So, I mean, it is quite intimidating, I'll be honest with you. Even from my perspective, if I'm walking through, often not in uniform, I'll be going sort of plain clothes to go and speak to off licenses, and you do have to walk through groups of often men hanging around directly outside the off licenses. Sometimes you have to sort of squeeze past them to get in the off licenses, and it's just the usual thing. Like most of them have been stood there drinking throughout the day, socialising. And it's just that kind of boisterous behaviour that can be quite intimidating to somebody that's sober as opposed to drunk. And then it comes with the other antisocial things, like it's been mentioned, I think, by residents about, you know, the salacious behaviour. So I've found like spitting, throwing cans on the floor, even though they're stood right next to a bin, the cans end up on the floor, the cigarette butts all over the street, things like that. So it ends up being like little pockets of like almost small bars around the town that you have to walk through to go into other businesses, or in some cases people are frightened to get on a bus because they use the bus shelter as a drinking shelter in some instances outside some shops.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Marshall, I see you're indicating.
Yes, it's a question for PC Clifford. So with the area for Hare Hills, in terms of number of calls and convictions and antisocial behaviour, what would have you got any rough figures for us for Hare Hills specifically, please?
No, because I deal with the shops for the licences, but Sergeant Winster has probably got a better idea about actual facts and figures for the local area, as it's his team that deal with it day to day.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, just one from me, PC Clifford, about the, it mentioned in the application, but you might know more about the cumulative impact assessment area itself, and the application mentions it's on the border. Do you want to give some more of that? I imagine you've got a bit more knowledge of the exact area and where the border lies, whether it's saying out on the border or not.
I would need the map in front of me, but I believe it's close to the border, but it is within it. It doesn't rest on the border, to my knowledge.
Okay, thank you. And that's it from me. Anything else from our members? That's fine. Could I invite Sergeant Winster then, please?
Yes, hello everybody. I'll have to apologise for the slightly unusual camera angle. I've had some technical issues today. So yes, my name is Fred Winster. I'm the neighbourhood policing sergeant for the local area, which means that I supervise a team of officers who deal with longer term policing issues and attempt to engage with the local community. So I've been a police officer for many years, but over the last 18 months, I've been in my current post and I've built up a lot of experience of working in the area and supervising officers who work in the area. And I've also had a lot of contact with people in the community. So I feel like I've built up a good understanding of policing locally. Throughout that time, it's been clear that the public consumption of alcohol has been a problem. And it's been a priority almost from my arrival 18 months ago and has continued through that time. I've written a detailed written submission, but in summary, there's issues with noise nuisance, with litter. People feel intimidated as they go to the shops at times, and businesses complain that it damages their business. And there have been issues with violence and incidents of disorder, which are directly connected to the public consumption of alcohol in the immediate vicinity of this proposed licence location. We have worked hard in trying to address that through the enforcement of the PSPO, which applies locally. We've engaged with support organisations. We've tackled it through other means, directly dealing with the criminality associated with the disorder. And it's at times it has had an effect in reducing the issues. But I have to state that even since preparing my written report, the issues with the public consumption of alcohol have increased in the area, is my current assessment. There's a number of reasons why we've been less effective than we would like to be, but it does include the proliferation of off licenses in the local area. As we work with off licenses to persuade them not to sell to particularly problematic individuals, then there's plenty of choices for those street drinkers to go to, and they can choose to go to a different location. The proliferation of off licenses also reduces the cost of alcohol, is my assessment, and directly engaging with the drinkers, many of whom live outside of the area. In fact, the vast majority live outside the area, travel to Hare Hills to drink, and they tell us that one of the reasons they travel is because of the cheap alcohol that's available and the fact that it's very freely available. So there's lots of options for purchasing their alcohol. I've picked up on the point about reducing, not selling stronger types of alcohol. That hasn't been my personal experience of the street drinking in the area from seizing numerous containers of alcohol from drinkers. My assessment is that price is the primary driving factor. So the cheapest price per unit is what the drinkers will purchase. Yeah, I've included some figures in my written submission around crime and calls to the police related to alcohol, which appear to be increasing in the immediate vicinity of the proposed licence location. And I've also noted that adult nuisance calls are remaining static in that immediate vicinity, although they're decreasing overall in the ward area. So it's not a case of I'm against any off licensing opening in any location throughout the whole of Hare Hills. It does appear that there's a specific issue in the immediate location of that particular shop. And I'll just conclude by saying that overall it's clear to me that granting a license would increase crime and disorder in the immediate vicinity of that store. And yeah, that's all I've got to say on the matter. But if there's any questions, then obviously I'm happy to hear them.
Thank you. Councillor Marshall, Councillor Buckley, anything?
Yeah, thank you, Sergeant. Do you have any figures for the crime and disorder that you have for that area? I'm sure the second time I'm asking. I did ask.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Specifically.
I've included some for the streets in the immediate vicinity of that store. I don't have any to hand covering kind of a wider area. Hare Hills does have sorry, the Gibson and Hare Hills ward, I should say, because it's split across two wards. The Gibson and Hare Hills ward does have one of the highest areas of crime and in the city, and it's also one of the highest areas of deprivation.
Okay, thank you very much. And you did mention that alcohol is cheap and freely available there. So when you use the word cheap, is that in comparison to other areas in terms of the same kind of alcohol? Why is theirs cheaper?
I'm not an expert in the sale of alcohol, and alcohol businesses, street drinkers generally will say that their cans of strong lager are purchased for £1 or less, which from my personal experience is abnormally cheap.
Cheaper than other areas?
Again, I'm making an assumption based on anecdote rather than having done a statistical analysis or anything like that. But yes, from my personal experience, a super strength can of lager for less than £1 is cheaper than you would find it elsewhere.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Buckley.
Nothing further at the moment, Chair.
Okay, that's fine. I don't think I have even, just checking my notes. No, that's fine. Thank you, Sergeant Winster. Could I now invite the licensing authority? We've got Sue Duckworth.
Thank you, Chair. You will see my rep from page 47, 48, 49 of your bundle. In that representation, I have detailed the issues that we're having in that area, including the results of the alcohol risk matrix, which shows that we have an issue with children in the area, including a high number of children under 16, a high number of looked after children, a lot of children who are considered NEETs, and quite a high level of youth offences. I also include in my representation some statistics around police evidence. This is for the community of impact area. This is data that is a little bit aged now, but we did the community of impact assessment in 2018, and it came into effect in January 2019. So you do have some data there. I know Councillor Marshall was looking for some exact figures, and they are there. And also my representation details the public concerns that we have in the area. This is all evidence that was brought to light as part of our community of impact assessment in 2018. And in my experience, the area has not improved since then. I did want to address the matter that Mr. Semper has brought up regarding stagnation and community impact assessments in general. I feel the other issues in my representation will be covered anyway by the other objectors that are here today. But if I can address the policy issues, he talked about stagnation and the fact that a community impact assessment cannot bring an iron curtain down on the granting of all licenses in an area, and he is quite correct. That was highlighted to us in the Brewdog case a number of years ago. And we, as you will know, councillors, having been on licensing committee for some time, we do take that very seriously. And in fact, if you want some evidence of that, if you have a look at Headingley, which has had a community impact assessment in place for a very long time, since 2009, we have recently, in the last 3 or 4 years, been a little bit more selective over the applications that we object to under the community impact assessment. In conjunction with the ward councillors there, we have promoted the alternative and slightly different styles of operation. And in fact, we've seen this area turn around, and in fact, it has significantly improved the area by allowing a different style of operation from the type of premises that were an issue for Headingley, and those premises were the stand-up drinking, student-oriented, sell it cheap, get people very drunk kind of premises. And we've had a complete turnaround in that area, and in fact have recently been able to reduce the size of the Headingley Community Impact Assessment as a result, and I think everybody will agree that area is a bit of a success. However, in Hare Hills and this application, quite simply, this application is just not different enough. It is another off-licence, small off-licence in the area, selling a small amount of alcohol, but the problems are with people drinking alcohol on the street, not your traditional street drinkers. These are large groups of men drinking alcohol in the street, and this is exactly the clientele that this off-licence will have. It's not just alcohol dependence, as I say, these are large groups of gentlemen just drinking in the street and causing disorder. I think really that's all I have to say. I did want to just make it very clear that Mr. Semper is quite right. We have to be careful with community impact assessments, not to halt development in an area. And I think in Leeds specifically, we are very much alive to that concept, and we are forever trying to improve our areas by encouraging different styles of business. This is not a different style of business. This is just another off-licence. And then the other thing to consider is, if Mr. Semper is saying that the amount of alcohol that this premise is going to be selling is so small, is it really worth the risk? Is it really that vital to this business? Are they providing such a brilliant opportunity otherwise that alcohol sales are necessary in this area? Unless members have got any questions, I will leave the other matters to the other objectors that are here today.
Thank you. I'll start with a question from me, if I may, Neil and Abigail, because I've given you the chance first dibs on the other ones. Mr. Semper mentioned the marking of products sold. And I mentioned Wakefield there. Has that been done elsewhere in the city, either Hare Hills or anywhere else?
I don't believe so. I have been involved in that kind of a scheme in a previous authority that I worked for in Harrogate, and we used the Alphatrack system, which is sticky labels of specific colours. To be honest with you, it really doesn't help. I'm not entirely sure what it's supposed to resolve. We found in that project, knowing where the alcohol was purchased from didn't help at all. In that case, we were having issues with children buying alcohol, and it was no guarantee that those children bought alcohol from that premises, or somebody else bought it on their behalf. So it actually didn't help at all. So I'm not quite sure what that kind of tracing is supposed to achieve, to be honest.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Marshall, Councillor Buckley.
I'm okay. I've actually seen the information I was looking for, so thank you very much.
Yeah, nothing from me, Chair, at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Just going down my list, we've got Mr. Mudge from the Communities Environment team.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, as you say, I work within the communities team. I've been brought into this area, i.e. Hare Hills, because of the particular problems there. And it's been identified as one of the most problematic areas in Leeds for street drinking. The other one is Town Street Armley, where I also operate, working with the police there similarly. Both have an abundance of off licenses, both have SIPs drawn up by the community and members in protest at the large number of off licenses in the area. These haven't just appeared, as we all know. They've come about because of massive disappointment by the communities and councillors and everyone else, police, on the amount of alcohol being sold in that area. And this application simply adds to that problem for Hare Hills. Indeed, in our action plan, which we've drawn up cumulatively with the police, ward members and officers, reduction of street drinking is the #1 priority. Indeed, in Hare Hills, the problem's so bad, we've had to fund a specialist team to try and turn addicts away from drinking. They go and stand with the addicts and they help them find out what their problems are and their issues which have led them to this. And then the aim is to help them through it to get them out the other side. But of course, with so many street drinkers, this really does only concentrate and have success with a few. This is the only area of the city where I'm aware we found this to be needed. Introducing another area for off-licence sales into a new part of the neighbourhood will of course have detrimental effects. There may be greater problems, there may be not such big problems, but nonetheless they are problems and it is a negative step. In my experience of nearly 30 years rejuvenating shopping areas in local communities, and indeed through my links with colleagues across the UK in similar positions, none welcome extra off licenses into shopping areas. There's plenty already, and it's not seen as beneficial to have more off licenses within those shopping areas. Indeed, for the neighbourhoods, it's always the off licenses are causing us the issues. Today, we've all been speaking about the problems of off licenses and how much of a problem this is, but nonetheless, I think we all accept it will be a problem. If a new off license is opened on Seaforth Place or anywhere else in the area, without doubt some hardened street drinkers will begin to operate nearby, giving yet another problem to the community and services trying to ever more limit the street drinking in Hare Hills. If indeed street drinkers want to get by a drink from that off licenses, they can club their funds together as they frequently do, or get someone to buy it for them. Finally, there are many children living in the vicinity, and opening another off license sets a nationally recognised bad precedent for them for their upbringing. According to the Leeds Observatory, which, if anyone doesn't know, are statistics around on the city centre and around the city, all the districts, how they operate and how successful they are, 31% of the population in the Hare Hills vicinity are children aged 0 to 15 years. This compares with the UK and overall Leeds figure of 19.3, meaning the area is getting on for twice as many children. Additionally, the proposed site for the off licence is in the vicinity of several schools, notably the Co-op Academy, Hare Hills Primary School, Compton Road Nursery and St Augustine's Catholic Primary School, so there will be more children in that vicinity. I would now like to pass over to my colleague Chetna from Public Health to provide some additional information on this.
Hi, thank you, Peter. Thank you, everyone. Just to follow on from what Peter Mudge has said and Sue, in terms of the objective of protection of children from harm. So Peter has already mentioned there are higher numbers of children living in the area compared to Leeds. We have more looked after children as well, and we have a higher number of children, young people, not in education, employment and training. What we found is where adults are misusing alcohol, this can have a significant effect on children's long-term health into adulthood. Looked after children come into care due to a significant number of parents who are misusing alcohol or drugs. In the area, we have a best start zone. So for Chapeltown and Hare Hills, we have a designated area called the best start zone. This is to help families who have children between 0 and 2 to get the best start in life. At those meetings, we have a number of stakeholders, including children's centres, early help hubs and primary care, and we often get reports back about parents who are misusing alcohol and the impact this has on children. We also have issues around mothers who are drinking during pregnancy, which has a detrimental effect on a child when it's born. The police person, sorry, I forgot your name, mentioned not just street drinkers, but also men drinking. So we do have additional people who drink as well, which may be unseen, as I mentioned, women. Those adults that are misusing alcohol are at increased risk of physical and mental health issues, as well as social issues, which have been mentioned: insecure housing, unemployment, and involvement of crime. In the area of Hare Hills, we have high levels of poverty and deprivation. So alcohol is often used as a coping mechanism to cope with difficult and challenging situations. Some other areas I just want to touch on is that those who are misusing alcohol are often signposted and referred to services around the city, including drugs and alcohol treatment services. We know already that these services are full to capacity and struggle to get new referrals into services. We have A&E services that are already stretched, and we have the issue of accidents that are increased due to alcohol consumption, as well as an increase into hospital admissions. The same can be said for mental health and GP services, where we have people come in who need support into already stretched services. I just want to add also, in terms of the public safety objective, you'll be aware of the coronavirus pandemic that we're in at the moment. We've seen a number of rising cases in Hare Hills. So we've had more cases in Hare Hills. This has been increasing across Leeds, but more so in Hare Hills. Often when people are drinking, they are not socially distancing or wearing a face mask. So people could potentially be coming in and out of licences, not socially distancing or wearing masks, and this could potentially increase cases of coronavirus and therefore increase public safety issues as well. So just to summarise, increasing the number of premises selling alcohol in the area is highly likely to add to the burden of ensuring public safety in the local area and increase the rates of public disorder, as been mentioned by the officers. However, of greater concern is the vulnerability of children living in the area who may be at risk of alcohol-related harm should any premises be granted an off licence to sell alcohol. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Buckley and Councillor Marshall, have you any questions for?
Yes, Chair. Just a question for either of our last two contributors, actually, because I think they both mentioned, as did others, this perceived problem of groups of men standing on the street corners and drinking. And I just wondered, just to turn the argument round for half a minute, what their reaction would be to somebody who came along and said, well, this is a cultural thing, and it does involve men, generally. and that in itself is not something which should be automatically discouraged.
Are you happy for me to answer this initially? Yes, I mean, as I mentioned, I'm working across all district centres, but the vast majority of my work is in ones with strong ethnic groups, Armley, Hare Hills, and also Dewsbury Road. And you're absolutely right. There's different ethnicities have different needs in communities. I mean, in where there's a Muslim community, for instance, alcohol is less prevalent. Where there's Eastern European community, by and large, it's more prevalent because that is the nature of the groups there. But we need to try to keep our areas safe for everybody and welcoming to everybody, because there's many. We're a multicultural area in Hare Hills, and so we need to have limits on stuff. We need to not allow people to be sick in the streets or urinate in the streets or defecate in the streets, as is happening at the minute. Those aren't acceptable behaviours. We need to draw levels on things, and through the SIP and through the work which we're doing, we're trying to make the place welcoming to everybody. Thank you.
Can I just add to that, yeah, I mean, I think there is cultural issues of men standing outside and drinking. And one of the things that we started to do before coronavirus was third sector organisations in the area were going out to talk to people about drinking and just, you know, have a discussion with people about drinking and seeing what support was needed. So we did start to do that work prior to the lockdown. We had to pause that due to coronavirus, but we are looking at other ways of dealing with the problem and the challenges as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Buckley, are you all right with the answer there?
That's fine for now, Chair, yeah.
Okay, Councillor Marshall.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Obviously, I would like to refer to page 22, and that's also following on Councillor Buckley, and it states clearly there that approximately 77% of people, 77% people are of ethnic background where it is unacceptable to drink alcohol, and 20.3% of households do not speak English. So that is something that we need to have a look at. What I would like to ask Chetna as well, you mentioned young people who are not in education, employment, or training. In terms of percentage and data again, what is the statistics for Hare Hills?
I think they're already, are they in there, Sue? I'm just thinking of the data that you presented.
I can find that figure out for you. Yeah.
Yeah. In the letter that Sue's written, it's ranked 44 out of 482 LSOA. Okay. So the young people not in education, employment, or training. If you want more specific information than that, I can get that for you.
Okay, I'm just going to try and see how we can also, how much effect in terms of the sales of alcohol and the antisocial behavior around those figures and those group of people. That is quite concerning for me. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And a question, probably Mr. Mudge is best to answer this out of the two of you, about the public space protection order and how long that's been in place and whether that's had an effect. Although I did miss out asking the sergeant earlier on, but Peter, have you had experience of that as one of the communities officer? Was that in place before the cumulative impact assessment area? And how effective or not has that been?
Yes, public space protection orders were introduced nationally within the last 20 years. I don't have an exact date, but and replaced what had gone previous. The idea of them is that they set limits on what can happen in that area, and then the police particularly can respond to that if they feel the street drinking is becoming a problem. So for instance, we've got a public space protection order in Hare Hills. We've also got one in Armley and Wetherby and Otley. And so the drinking can go ahead, but if it's going to, for me, so I don't think another exponential levels, then the reductions can come in. In Hare Hills, it's the situation that the police take the alcohol away from anyone found street drinking and pour it down a drain in front of them. The reason they pour it down the drain is that they were formerly taking it away and putting it in a bin, and then the street drinkers were then taking it out of the bin and carrying on drinking it. So that's the levels it's reached in Hare Hills. Does that answer your question?
Just on how effective that might have been to reduce this sort of behaviour in Hare Hills, if that can be seen yet.
We've particularly on Hare Hills Lane, where a lot of the off licenses are, we had to take this drastic measure of chucking everything down the drain in front of people, and it did have a good effect. It did lead to hugely reducing the street drinking on the street. The problem is then the people went elsewhere. Some of them, we reduced numbers hugely, but some of them went to Compton Road, and Fred and Sergeant Winston and I are currently working into that, and that's why I mentioned we have a specialist team operating to try and reduce the problems. The concern is that if we move them from there, they'll find somewhere else to go to, and this is why we don't feel opening up a new area to sale of alcohol would be beneficial.
Okay, thank you. Anything else from my fellow members? No, that's good, thank you. Could I invite then the local ward members? We'll start with Councillor Salma Arif, and then I don't know if you're speaking on behalf of both members or if Councillor Arif is saying you want to speak as well, but we'll start with Salma if we may.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Just really quickly before I move on to the main body of what I want to say, Councillor Marshall Katung and Councillor Buckley, you asked questions about the crime figures. I recall these figures because when we were doing the CIP campaigning, I knew that there were 1,710 crimes that were recorded between 2016 and 2017, and most crimes where alcohol was involved led to criminal violent crimes. The other thing I do also want to talk about is the NEAT figures, which I believe are included in the application. As elected members, we all get briefings on sort of our NEAT figures. I've not had one recently, obviously, because of the pandemic, and we've not had that opportunity. But if I may say, Hare Hills actually has one of the highest NEAT figures across the city. That also is because we have one of the youngest younger people in a population in the community. So hopefully that might give you some answers there. Okay, so as ward councillors representing Hare Hills, it's vital that we articulate the scale of the opposition there is to this licensing application. To begin with, I want to say that all three councillors, Councillor Hussain, Councillor Maksud and I, stand in unison with colleagues in the police, the Clean Neighbourhoods team, the licensing team, the communities team, public health, local businesses and residents in saying that Hare Hills does not need any more off licenses. The simple fact is Hare Hills is already saturated with businesses selling alcohol. To put this into context, on Hare Hills Lane and Hare Hills Road, approximately 70% of the shops sell some form of alcohol that is both cheap and strong, a potent mix. We all know the challenges Hare Hills faces as a ward. This is a neighbourhood where residents face some of the most social and economic challenges in the UK. Complex challenges that have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Only last week, the Telegraph reported that the pandemic has seen problem drinking double in the UK since lockdown was introduced. We are seeing the consequences of this locally, as a hard group of street drinkers are a regular presence in Hare Hills. And whilst we recognise that this is a vulnerable group of individuals, the consequences to the wider community are manifesting in itself in daily antisocial behaviour, littering, and on occasion, violence. All this is happening in a densely populated area that has a huge volume of families with young children. Now, can it be right that residents have to put up with a constant hangover on their doorstep day after day? Imagine the empty cans, the smell of urine, and the sight of human excrement and broken glass greeting you as you walk to school. This is a reality for residents in Hare Hills, unfortunately. Now, to try to address this in the last few years, we have introduced both a Public Space Protection Order, PSPO, and the Cumulative Impact Policy, the CIP, both pieces of legislation which seek to offset the devastating impact of problem drinking in the area. We as ward councillors have also supported a new project that will see professional outreach work happening in Hare Hills to engage our street drinkers in a bid to help people address their addictions. To approve this application actually would be irresponsible and actually cause harm to our most vulnerable residents. It would also contradict all the hard work by the police, council, councillors, partners, and most importantly, local residents who are exhausting themselves to make their area safer and more pleasant place to live in. Residents, okay. So the testimonies from local residents who also represent Hare Hills and Bloom, Hare Hills Community Watch and other group illustrate just how deep this opposition goes. And when I'm talking, members, I've got all these people behind me, so please bear that in mind. It's not just me talking, it's all my residents talking. Many residents have written to me to object to this application. As their local councillor, I represent their views today. For the benefit of the committee, I want to read out just some of the sentiments of the local residents. So resident 1 says, residents have everything they can to have done everything they can to lessen the impact that such saturation of off licenses has on the community. They have spent hours litter picking cans and bottles discarded by customers of local shops. They have kept awake by late night drinkers making their way home in rowdy fashion. They have had to wash down their outside space after finding it used as a toilet. Many have been keeping an eye out on a local play area which is being used as a drinking haunt and a toilet, leaving the space unfit for children to play in the next day. Parents have needed to have difficult conversations with their children and young people who have witnessed violence and other alcohol-fueled antisocial behaviour in Hare Hills, which children living in other areas of the city would never be aware of, never mind see with their own eyes. That's one of the residents. The second resident has written to me and she said, or they've said, it is devastating. Even in the recent lockdown, the issues related to alcohol sales and consumption persisted. Antisocial gatherings on street corners, littering of bottles and cans, discarded along pavements, stuffed into hedges or tossed into people's gardens. Also, drunks blocking pavements, intimidating passers-by as they stand and drink all day and late into the evening, urinating and defecating openly in the streets. Given that there is already an off licence at the other end of this residential street, Baba Jagger, as well as several more off licences, not only 100 yards away on Hare Hills Lane, plus Morrison's at the top of the street, the area needs another off licence like it needs a hole in the head. I would also point out that the certain communities in this area are more vulnerable to alcohol-related domestic violence, as women experiencing this are less able to find appropriate help because English is not their first language. This leaves them extremely isolated and vulnerable, and also means that children in the area are disproportionately brought up under the shadow of negative influences of alcohol. That's the second resident. Coming on to my third and final resident. I'm a resident of Seaforth Place. Unlike other areas like Hare Hills Lane and Hare Hills Road, the location of Zuba is totally surrounded by residential properties who would have to bear the brunt of any prospective noise, antisocial behaviour and litter. The Hare Hills Lane end of Strathmore Terrace already has issues with people gathering in groups, drug dealing and other antisocial behaviour. The other nearest off licence is Baba Jagger 2 on Strathmore Drive, only 150 metres from Zuba. Customers of this shop often gather on the back street behind to drink, leading to an increase in litter and public urination. The empty house, which sits next door to Baba Jagger 2, has had its back garden entirely filled with detritus, a large amount of which was empty cans from the drinkers who gathered outside. Street drinking has been a persistent social problem in Hare Hills, and despite concerted and consistent pressure from local residents, one that has yet to be resolved. The problem simply gets moved around as drinkers find new places to gather. I believe that issuing more licenses will only make the problem worse. I was interested to read the license application that the applicant claimed to have asked local residents who had no objection to the shop being licensed. This is certainly not true in my case. As a nearest neighbour, I wonder who exactly was asked. In conclusion, a successful application could only increase antisocial behaviour, littering and criminal activity in a residential area that already faces these problems. Members, this was just a small sample of many objections as councillors that we were privy to. Now, I just want to come on to the Zuba application. At first glance, the application looks like a lengthy document that shows a certain amount of effort has gone into it. But the longer you actually read, and anyone who knows the area intimately will soon find questionable and inaccurate finding. The questions in the application are not answered like you would expect. Instead, what you get are statements, facts, and more information, which makes it more harder to read actually, and almost feels like the applicant is trying to bamboozle the reader, which is exactly the feedback that I got from my residents. If I can ask you to look at page 5 of the applicant. The final paragraph reads on page 5. Due to the location of the premises, it is expected 97% of the customers will live within a 500-metre radius. Okay. What the applicant fails to mention is that within the 500-metre radius, we have all the existing drinking hotspots like the Lane. We've got the Compton Centre hotspot, and we've also got the Hare Hills Road. Essentially, meaning 90% of the customers who are coming from the problem hotspots. Okay, moving on to page 8 of the same application. The very first sentence reads, there are a few similar trading style shops on Hare Hills Lane, approximately 600 yards from the premises, but there does not appear to be a density. I would like to point out for the benefit of the committee that Baba Jagger 2 on Strathmore Drive, which runs perpendicular to Seaforth Place with nearly identical opening hours to what the application is seeking, is a mere 150 yards away. Okay. Again, on page 8, if you look on paragraph 2.3, it reads, no beer or cider with an ABV of 6.5% or above will be stored or sold from the premises. 2.4 reads, no single cans of beer, lager or cider will be sold from the premises. This eliminates any street drinkers or young persons with a small amount of money buying alcohol for themselves or gaining alcohol via proxy sales. Okay, just looking at the time. Okay, it's great to hear that the strong beers will not be sold, but what about the bottles of spirits? Okay, we frequently see these little bottles in amongst the rubbish left by street drinkers that gather in the area and smashed on the pavement on the roads. Okay, we also know that street drinkers already gather in groups not far from this location attracted by Baba Jagger 2. So there seems to be a great naivety in the comment that not selling a single cans will eliminate the drinkers. It is clear that they gather in a group and they make it they take it in turns to buy their alcohol in greater numbers. The comment about young people is the same. They often gather in groups, and it is concerning that this is the applicant's idea of satisfactory solution to eliminate the street drinking problem locally. Moving on, we have what we call the Hare Hills Community Watch, which is a Facebook group. It was fascinating to read on page 13, if I can get members to look at page 13 of the application, please. The applicant says that he took time out to read the comments on Hare Hills Community Watch Facebook group. It reads, the local Hare Hills Community Watch Facebook group was interesting to read, as it is a living commentary of daily life of local residents in and around Hare Hills. I read the comments for about 1 hour and never read any negative comments about drunkenness or unzipping flies in the street or being swamped in a sea of alcohol or hosing down sick and urine spattered pavements or the ensuing tsunami of antisocial behaviour. Members, spending 1 hour on the Hare Hills Community Watch group is not going to give anyone an insight into a community's problem. Let me tell you, as someone who was born in this area and now representing it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I can tell you every single word about that drunkenness and urine spattered payment is sadly very true. Just for your benefit, when I sent across further evidence of street drinking, there was 3 comments from local residents. That was actually from the Hare Hills Community Watch. I'm not sure if you've had a read of that. So if the applicant did look a little bit deeper, he would have certainly have found something. Okay. As lead member for Child-Friendly Leeds, it would be remiss of me not to mention the likely harmful impact of this application on our youngest residents. The proposed premises is located on the corner, but the layout of this area means that this shop is surrounded by and faces people's homes and is overlooked by windows, many of which are children's bedrooms. The children on Seafoots need to be sheltered from any ASB, which is regular witness close to off licenses, and instead be allowed to get their heads down so they can get up early for school. 10 o'clock may not be considered late to the applicant, but for families trying to get their babies and their small children to bed, this is very late indeed. Okay, so I'm going to conclude. Unfortunately, to me, the client simply does not seem to be aware or interested in about the negative impact a shop selling alcohol can have on an area like Hare Hills. The application by Zuba falls within the CIP area on Seaforth Place in the heart of a residential area. Members, we don't need a crystal ball to know that if this tiny one more application is granted, we will see an increase in crime and disorder. Public safety will be compromised, resulting in public nuisance, which will inevitably harm the youngest residents in our ward. I implore this sub-licensing committee to refuse this application in its entirety because Hare Hills does not need another off-licence. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Arif. Councillor Marshall, any questions from you first of all?
I just want to say thank you very much, Councillor Arif, for your very passionate presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Buckley, any questions or comments?
Yeah, just briefly, Chair. It was a very compelling presentation from Councillor Arif, and as Councillor Marshall said, thank you for that. Just very, very briefly, just to get my understanding straight, we've heard about the problems which are prevalent all day, but what time of day is the worst? Is it 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock or midnight? What period is the worst?
If I'm really honest with you, Mr. Buckley, Councillor Buckley, it's constant. My residents are telling me it's during the day. If you look at the photographs that you see that I've sent across, it's all day around the clock because we've got so many off licenses that are selling them for 24 hours. If this applicant is looking to open from 7 a.m. till 10 o'clock, effectively it's in Hare Hills at the moment, it's non-stop, to answer your question. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks from me as well. Not had many ward members in subcommittees, but that was one of the most coherent things we've had, most coherent representations. Thank you. I have no questions, but Councillor Hussain, do you want to speak, or was Councillor Arif speaking on the 3 ward members and residents' behalf? That's fine.
I was indeed, but if Councillor Hussain wants to come in and make some comments, he's obviously welcome to do so.
Sorry, Chair. Actually, I don't think Councillor Hussain has submitted a representation, so he wouldn't be to address you.
That's fine. We'll take your presence as enough. Then, thank you. I think looking at who's on here on my written list and just on the call, that's all of the objectors. Unless someone wants to tell me otherwise. I'm reliably informed, Mr. Semper, you have 7 minutes left if you want to sort of sum up and answer any questions. No new information, but as I understand it, but certainly answering any of the concerns there.
Yes, I'm going to have to be quick because the applicant himself wants to address you. So I'm going to speak for about 3 or 4 minutes if that's okay. Right. Okay. 1. Nobody is saying that Hare Hills doesn't need its cumulative impact policy. This hearing is all about the likelihood that this small store operating under these conditions will add to cumulative effect. Okay. Second, all these pre-existing problems cannot be laid at the feet of the applicant, who has sold 0 alcohol products to date, period. 3, we have heard lots of references. No wish for a further license, just one more. In the last one, which was excellent, fantastic. Hare Hills does not need any more off licenses, need another off license like a hole in the head, and what have you. It goes on like that. That, I'm afraid, is the Iron Curtain coming clanging down. Okay, the Brewdog versus Leeds City Council case of 2012, District Judge Anderson was absolutely clear that you cannot bring in a blanket ban on new applications under a CIP. Okay, now the police, excellent as always. Okay, people, oh no, there's some talk about this culture of social drinkers. Okay, so if you want, we'll place some signs outside telling people not to loiter. Furthermore, we will use our best endeavours to ensure that people do not loiter outside. The police mentioned proxy sales. Well, proxy sales is addressed as part of the training, but if you want signs in the shop warning people about proxy sales, you can have them. Okay, now Sergeant Winster, excellent, explained to us that people buy on price. Well, here's one. We will, for cans of beer, cider and lager, offer 50p per unit of alcohol minimum pricing, like they do in Scotland. Okay, there's been some reference to whether the application is really necessary. I'm afraid that's irrelevant under the Licensing Act. That's specifically the need for another, and the economic arguments for the benefits of having a license. Those are specifically excluded. And lastly, Chetna mentioned the coronavirus. Okay, yeah, we get that. Okay, we're living in unprecedented times. Perhaps if we come to some agreement that we will not sell alcohol until local restrictions are lifted, that should address Chetna's very proper observations. The neat figures, well, I've already explained, we won't sell to children. We've offered the most stringent conditions going, and that is challenge 25. And therefore, that's about the lot of representations had to take, have to quickly fly over them all. But we maintain that we have offered extremely robust conditions and further robust conditions as a result of the representations today to ensure that it is unlikely that our operation will cause additional negative cumulative impact on the licensing objectives, which is everything that we're required to do by the legislation and the guidance. And consequently, I exhort you to grant this application, and we will, of course, accept any further conditions that you, Mr. Gardner, and your team feel are proportionate appropriate to this tiny shop. Thank you. Now, it's only fair that I hand over to the applicant himself, because I'm sure that you want to hear from him, and I know that he would like to speak to you.
Thank you. Mr. Abdullah, if you want to unmute yourself, we'll be happy to hear from you.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for all represented. I just want to raise in a few points. I have been dealing with the Hare Hills area for many years, and I have been working in Hare Hills about 10 years. I've got a travel agency on Hare Hills Road, and a salon as well, and a law firm as well. So I'm very familiar for the area. So to my point of view, a local authority, a councillor, they cannot find in any different method to help the community in Hare Hills. Easiest, quickest stop off license to selling alcohol. So if you think about that, you've got Morrison's selling very cheap, you've got Asda next to me very cheap, you've got the Sainsbury's selling very cheap. So for those issues, the councillor, they cannot work hard and send in a pupil in the area for through the education, or think about it, opening a college around the area, developing the area like an infrastructure for the area. So that's a local authority, very weak is down the area. Easiest, nicest way, we close down the business because the alcohol, because alcohol behavior the church in the community, no. Okay, so also to my shop, if the give it a chance, I'm not selling just a single beer can. I'm not gonna sell in a strong beers, and I happy have a limited time open it in my area. And one point I want to be judgment reviewing councillor voices, why she mentioned Baba Jack about 6-7 times. So why? Something coming to my head, I go for it. So is Morrison's close to Baba Jaga? There are 6 offlines next to each other on Harriers Road, Harriers Lane. On Harriers Road as well, Bugadis, Baba Jaga 1, post office, they are all linking together. What is the reason she mentioned Baba Jaga many times close to me? I'm close to Harriers Lane. Miss, if you born and bred, you should know I'm close to Harriers Street like rather than Baba Jaga. So anyway, I'm just hopefully we spend a lot of money on the business. We're losing a lot. We've been working in this area at the supermarket over 8-7 months. We're very familiar for the people. We do not have any trouble. We have a good CCTV camera. We help the police for any crimes happen. We're giving footages. We're giving a phone number. And the neighbor had a petition, and neighbor signed it. And we sent it to my representatives. They're giving to you. They're happy we have offline. And because we are middle of the road, we try to public not going to cross the road, like make them easier than go to Harriers Lane and like for a safety issue. So that's only this point I raise in it. And also I'm not gonna sell in a drink promise to the judge, to the people who's under 18, and also I'm never selling a drink to the people on street. So we know all the legislation stuff. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Abdullah. And you were just on time there with yourself and Mr. Semper. So that's your 7 minutes. I'm afraid not, Mr. Semper. That's your 7 minutes, just as agreed at the beginning. So thank you very much to you both. Okay, so we'll now move into private session to deliberate on the application, but thank you to everyone, and especially for your time, because this is there have been a lot of objectors a bit longer than usual, especially remotely. It's a little bit different than being in the Civic Hall, so thank you all. Could I ask all parties, including the applicant and the representative and the licensing officer, remain available on the call should the subcommittee, should we have any additional questions. If we do have additional questions, you'll be invited back into the main meeting as we are now by the clerk. John. Just unmute, John. Thank you.
We're still live on the council's YouTube channel, so can I please ask you to make sure your microphones remain muted. Members and the legal officers and the clerk are now going to move into a breakout room for private discussions. They'll return in approximately 10 minutes when those discussions are complete, so please remain on the call. Andy, can you move us into the breakout room, please?
Right, I think we've got everyone back in, so thank you everyone for your patience there and your attendance. We have no further questions as members of the subcommittee, so that concludes the business for today. So thank you for waiting there. Sometimes we do have further questions. In this case, we don't. So you will be informed of the decision within 5 working days. But just a final thank you to everyone in the session, and if anyone is watching, thank you. Have a good rest of the day.
Can we please switch the